Hi, this is Renina Mentor of Sunshine Living, and today I'm going to talk about Miss USA Cheslie Kryst. I want to be sensitive and mindful. I want to be respectful. This is probably one of the most challenging videos that I've recently decided to do. I want to make sure that I am respecting Cheslie, her family, and especially anyone struggling with depression or suicidal thoughts. I am a licensed therapist, a licensed psychotherapist. I have been working in the field for many years, and I have worked with people who were suicidal. I work with people with depression, even to this day. I've worked with people that were recently released from the hospital after a suicide attempt. I have been trained in trauma. I'm a trauma specialist. I also consult with companies on how best to handle mental health challenges in the workplace. So I share all of that because not to brag, but to say that I take this sort of thing very seriously. And I've been wanting to do this video for a while, and I just really wanted to do it with care, with compassion, and with respect. So we're just gonna get into it. So the first thing is Miss USA, Cheslie Kryst. If I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly, she committed suicide on January 30th, 2022. So forgive me, I did take notes because I just didn't want to leave anything out. I wanted to make sure that I shared everything. So she committed suicide on January 30th, 2022. As most people know, she was Miss USA, and she was an advocate for mental health. Um, it is important that we start with something that her mother said. Her mother shared that she felt that she had a high functioning depression, and I think that is so important for us to note. So first, high functioning depression is a real thing. And from a clinical perspective, we call it, as a therapist, we would call it persistent depressive disorder, right? But it's something that many people are struggling with. And the thing about a high functioning depression, we'll call it that because that's what most people will call it, is that there are people who are struggling with a high functioning depression and they don't realize that they are. And that's what makes it really tough. So, some things that I want to say about depression. I think as a culture, right, being in this country in America, we must understand that there's so much that we don't understand about depression. So many people still believe that depression is just people are a little sad. And because maybe if you've never struggled with depression and you know that you've been sad before and you realize that you can do this or you can do that and you can help yourself to feel better, that the people who are struggling with depression, they should be able to do the same thing. But unfortunately, it isn't that simple. And so depression is both a mental psychological thing as well as a physiological biological thing, right? So it's two parts. And what most people don't understand is that depression, when it is a diagnosable depression, not just sadness, shows up inside the body. And for some people, it shows up as a physical pain, like an ache inside the body. People don't feel well. It's not just a matter of sadness. Sadness happens to be one of the symptoms, but it literally shows up for many people as a heaviness. It shows up as a hopelessness. It shows up like a darkness even. But it most importantly, it shows up in the body as a physical ache. People feel an ache in their body that they can't seem to get beyond. They feel a heaviness in their body that they cannot get beyond. And so, for people who are trying to understand depression and why it's so serious, that's a part of it. If you can imagine feeling sick all the time and not being able to take an Advil or a painkiller to just feel better, right? It's complicated. So the first thing is functioning depression is a real thing. Another important part of functioning depression is that people function. So the people around you may not realize that you are struggling because you still go to work, because you can still hang out from time to time, because you have a smile on your face sometimes. People with functioning depression can function well enough to be in the world, but at the end of the day, they would feel a heaviness. They would, many of their weekends would be spent in bed. If they're not out with someone trying to show how well they're doing, right, or functioning, then they would be in bed all day, or they would feel a sense of tiredness often, right? They feel a heaviness, they feel a sadness, they would feel a sense of tired or exhaustion. They might not have the desire to want to be out and hanging out with others, but they find a way, because they're functioning, they find a way to get there, spend time with family and friends, get to work, get some work done. But when they get home, they will spend most of their time in bed. They might not shower over the weekend. They might not take care of themselves. They might do a lot of things that people don't ordinarily know about because they are functioning and they seem fine. So we must understand that functioning depression is a real thing, and it shows up in the body as a physical ache. It's a little tricky because people look fine, but ultimately it is something that can cause a person to want to end their lives. And that's the really, really hard part. And it's a tough thing when you love someone and you don't know how to help them. So I hope that I can address that today. Another part of this whole functioning depression is because it can cause a person to have those suicidal thoughts, those because of the darkness, the heaviness, the ache inside the body. A person may have suicidal thoughts not necessarily because they want to die, but because they want to be out of pain. And the only way that they see being out of pain is to take their own lives. And I hope that I'm not confusing anyone by sharing this, but this is kind of how it's described. I not only work with people who are struggling with depression, but I myself, right, have my own and have had my own mental health challenges in the past. Now I'm fine now, right? I'm better now, right? Because I've gone through therapy, because I have taken part in therapy that was very solution oriented and solution based, right? And I did a number of other things to manage the chemical imbalance that I had as well, which is the second point. The second point is depression is both a chemical imbalance and a trauma response. So, and it's typically one or both, right? So it shows up in a lot of different ways, but a lot of times it is both. And so the chemical imbalance means that people typically need, they need both a medical doctor to sort of check their bodies, right, to see if there is a chemical imbalance, and they need a therapist to help them with the processing of and the dealing with trauma. And so if we start with the chemical imbalance side, again, the chemical imbalance side is not my specialty because I'm a therapist, not a doctor, right? And so the chemical imbalance side, I will tell people that they need to have their bodies checked. You need to have a physical. You need to make sure that you have your hormones checked, because one of my chemical imbalances had to do with my hormones, and I would not have known that unless I had my hormones checked. So you must have your hormones checked. You need to have your vitamin and minerals checked. You can have a doctor check these things. Some people need to have a brain scan. These are not things that your doctor is necessarily going to check in your physical, but you need to understand that our bodies, the things that are going on in our bodies, a chemical imbalance in our bodies can impact our mind, right? It could be completely because of a trauma, but it could be because of a trauma and or because of a chemical imbalance. So I strongly suggest, if you are struggling with any sort of depression or even persistent depressive disorder, or functional depression, that you have a physical, that this needs to be the first thing that you do. Have a physical and have all of your levels checked, every level that you can think of, including your vitamins and minerals. You also want to consider not drinking while you're trying to heal. Drinking alcohol is a depressant. Alcohol also can change the chemistry of your mind, of your body. I know I like to have a drink from time to time, just like everyone else. But you have to be very careful if you're struggling with any sort of depression or depressive symptoms. And so you must understand that. You also want to make sure that you're getting 8 hours of sleep. Why? Because it impacts your physical body and it impacts your mind, not getting enough sleep. People often, think they know things about depression, but depression can come out of so many different things. Some people feel like, oh, I have depression because your mom had a depression, or your aunt or your grandmother had a depression. That there is some element of that is very true, right? But there are a lot of things that we may be doing in our lives that could be impacting our depression, or something could be going on in our body that could be impacting our depression, and we just want to be on top of it. So it's important to have a doctor look at all of those things. So that's the first part. Again, not my specialty, but information that I've learned over the years through my own depression, and information that I've learned with working with clients. And over the years, I've worked side by side with psychiatrists. So that's that side. The side that I am sort of trained to help is the side of the trauma, right? I'm a trauma specialist. I've been trained in trauma, and I help clients through trauma. And so on that side, I want it to be very clear that the mind is both simple and complicated at the same time. When we are dealing with depression, our depression will create a loop of delusion, and when I say delusion, I'm saying in a sense of focusing on thoughts that are not helpful, right? What ends up happening with our thoughts is our thoughts tend to feed off of each other. So it creates a loop of negativity, of worthlessness, of helplessness, of darkness. When you get into that space, the thoughts tend to feed off of each other, and they continue to spiral, right? Oftentimes in therapy, we'll talk about it being a downward spiral, that you start out feeling sad, and unless you can find the coping skills to get out of that spiral, it tends to get worse and worse. And that, a lot of times, at least from my professional experience, has been related to people needing to needing to process through their own trauma. So that is an important part of dealing with depression. I actually haven't worked with one client who had depression who didn't have a related trauma. Not one. So it's important to understand that this is why people need to go to therapy. And it's important to go to therapy because you will be working with someone who understands this. It's one thing to, go on TikTok or go online and get some skills and some tools about self-care. But depression is more than just having good self-care. It's so much more. It's a little bit more complicated than that. Just like I wouldn't recommend someone who has diabetes try to figure it out on their own, I would not recommend someone who is dealing with depression, even functional depression, to try to figure it out on their own. I know that it isn't always easy to find a therapist that looks like you or that you feel like you can relate to, or you're afraid of the stigma, but it is worth it. It is worth it, and I am proof of that. Not only because of the work that I do, but because of the work that I've been able to do to get myself out of my depression and to be in a space of joy. And I never imagined this, and I would not have been able to do this on my own. All right, so that was the second point. Depression is a chemical imbalance and typically a trauma response. Point 3 is please get help. Or if you know someone is struggling, please help them to get help. And so depression is more than self-care. It's more than self-care. You need professionals, specialists to help you navigate it, because it is both complicated and simple at the same time. And so that's important. Get help from professionals, right? Another point is if you are struggling and you feel suicidal, that's the sort of thing that needs immediate help. So if you know someone that's ever struggling with being suicidal, please call the suicide hotline number or call 911. Please, handle it immediately, because you just never know. It could save someone's life. And I'm going to include the suicide hotline number in the description below. If you are struggling, please tell a friend. Please speak to somebody, call your doctor, call the suicide hotline number, do something, because sometimes these things, suicidal thoughts, can create an impulsiveness where you just feel like you've had enough and you immediately do something to yourself that you can't take back. Okay, and so get help immediately. It's a couple of other things that I want us to remember is that we live in a world where there are less natural things to boost our mood. We are experiencing a version of the world right now where we have fewer things that would naturally increase our mood. We live in a world that is connected to the internet and social media and all those wonderful things. But because of that, we have less human touch, which improves mood. We have less connection. We have less exposure to the sun, which improves our mood. We might have also less exercise unless we're actively doing something. All of these things naturally create chemicals in the body to improve our mood. So because I'm hoping that you can understand this, we have to be very proactive about doing things to improve our mood, getting outside, exercising, connecting with other human beings, touching other human beings, giving hugs, and seeing people in person. These are the things that we need in order to also continue to improve our mood. Now, again, if you have depression, it's not the only thing that you need, but I just want people to be mindful of these types of things. It's also important that we understand that just because someone is functioning doesn't mean that they're doing well. We must understand that. If you have a sense that someone in your life is not doing well, check on them, ask them, let them know that you're there, give them the suicide hotline number just in case. Make sure that they understand that you understand some things about mental health, because hopefully you do, and that you're there for them. Another important thing that I wanted to say is it is possible to get out of the pain of depression, and it is possible to heal depression. I am a witness to that. I have worked with so many clients who were released from the hospital after attempting to kill themselves. And they, within a year or two, and sometimes a little bit longer, they felt more alive than they'd ever felt. They felt that they were healing, getting better, and sometimes they felt full on joy. and couldn't even have imagined how they could have ever considered such a thing. And many of these clients, I was the therapist, and they also had a psychiatrist. So many of these clients were on medication. Some of them stayed on medication, some of them did not, and that was between them and their doctor. But I can say that my work with them was about healing their trauma and about helping them to get the coping skills that they need. And the type of therapy that I believe is most effective is a solution based, tools based therapy, not just talk therapy. And I've seen so many people feel better, right, with an action based, tools based, solution based therapy. And many of them were also on medication. Again, it's possible. It is very much possible, and I want people to know that even if they've had a bad experience with a therapist in the past, doesn't mean that you can't find a therapist that you can relate to that can help you heal. So that's important to know. So please understand that the passing of Miss USA Cheslie Kryst is an opportunity for us to have conversations with the people that we love. It's important for us to know that starting a conversation could actually save someone's life. I hope that you learned something today. I hope that this was helpful in some way. I hope that you can see that I just want to be part of the solution. And share the video. Make a comment in below if you can. Make a comment below if you can relate to anything that I shared today. Like the video if something made sense. Join me on this journey, right? Follow me. And just know that there's hope. There's hope. There's hope. So whether it's you that may be struggling or you know someone who is struggling, there is hope. And sometimes we have to work together to find that hope. In closing, I will just say, never give up hope, and do your best to go forth and shine on the world.